So an agonising last-second loss for Argentina. I think an awful lot of us end up getting behind the Pumas towards the end there. It was quietly a hell of a game, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's one if you're Irish, you're probably looking at it going like, oh, that wasn't a great game, was it? But actually, if you're neutral, it was thrilling, it was dramatic, it kind of came out of nowhere an awful lot. You know, I think it's very much summed up by those first 2 minutes where we have it go so back and forward. You know, you have Ireland in complete control for a period, then Argentina go the distance, end up scoring this try from Maroney, who then gets sin-binned moments later for a high shot on Jack Crowley, who then scores himself moments later.
Yeah. It's one of those weird ones where your perception of the game is slightly altered by the timeline of things.
Yeah.
That Ireland gets so far ahead and then just stunt for a bit, and then Argentina pounce in the second half.
Argentina, I think, are really interesting because what Felipe Contepomi has done, and the first few weeks, it looked like he was kind of making them himself, right? And it looked more like, in a good way, like arrogant and boisterous, and like they believed in themselves in the way Contepomi always did, right? Yeah. Contepomi thought he was the best player on any pitch he ever played on. And they kind of had that vibe about them. And I think
Tom
what he's
Wright
doing,
confidence is what I call it.
yeah, is slowly building them into this side who are incredibly composed and disciplined and steady, and disciplined in like a tactical sense. You know?
Yeah.
Though we'll get
like
to the discipline.
willingness to stick to the game plan.
Yeah.
You know.
And yet, also, they know exactly when to break that, you know? And they quite often just break away and play really simple rugby, right? And we see, you know, they've had like a very set defensive structure, which is again relying on their centres an awful lot, you know? So hence why Maroney comes in, was very good, I thought, you know, obviously the one tackle aside. And then Shoka Barrows, I think, has been one of the best players of this year. Was brilliant for them over the Rugby Championship before his injury.
Yeah.
And yeah, they rely on the centres an awful lot to run everything in defence. But that means you've got two guys that can call them to change system on the fly, and that's really worked for them. And then again in attack, like they have been superb at changing the way they're attacking, changing the way they're playing.
Yeah.
And we saw them at the weekend, like get into that situation where they're 22-9 down. And a lot of teams, that feels, especially when you're away in Dublin in one of the toughest grounds, you know, Ireland have lost there twice in 4 years.
Yeah.
And you kind of figure, okay, we're out this game. And Argentina didn't, and he kept chipping away and knowing that actually one try turns this around completely.
Yeah, they're such a good team to watch, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they will turn anything into a dogfight, you know?
Yeah.
That you watch the first sort of 20-odd minutes of that game, and Ireland did that thing that Ireland do, right? It's not that Ireland just scored a few tries that felt like, oh, that's soft, you know?
Yeah.
Like, Ireland scored tries that made them look like Ireland. You know, the Crowley try, where it was a few phases, kind of like set move, until the gap opens up for Crowley to go himself. You know, particularly the Mac Hansen try was incredible, right? The Ringrose making a break, again, off organised play, him playing in the boot, and then Gibson Park's wrists, which are my favourite thing in all of rugby, how he flung that ball, like, he's so unpredictable to watch because he can get the ball to the wing in the same length of time it's taken to get the ball on the short carry, you know? The mirroring of that try where he flings the ball to Tyburn on the wing and Joe McCarthy's try where he chucks the ball 2 metres and they look like the same pass.
Yeah.
Because he's just that incredible, right? But my point is that that's what Ireland do best, right? Is score tries that are like that. You know, and you think, oh, Ireland are going to do this 9 times in this game. It's going to get ugly for Argentina. And Argentina go, no, they shut it down, right? I think Tomas Albornoz had a brilliant role in that. The way he kicked tactically and his kicking for goal as well was fantastic. And then in the second half, when they bring on Santiago Carreras and move Malia around the back line, again, Malia is exactly the guy they need in the back line for what they do, right?
Yeah.
When they turn something into a dogfight, he is so adaptable as a player that, you know, like the try he scores is incredible, right?
Yeah.
Because usually you expect him to run the line kind of out the back of that, and instead he runs the hard line and just turns it into a stone cold chance, and it's just incredible.
I think the combination of the try he scored against Ireland, but also the try he scored against Italy really sums up his value to this team, right?
100%.
Where that game was a dogfight and it was close, and if anything, Italy were the team opening it up. And then suddenly he, in a split second, through being incredibly alert and playing to the whistle, and also that kind of Toulouse-Jouet thing that has like boosted his game endlessly. And, you know, he's also brought something to that team. Leads to him running that in, you know, from 70 metres. And then likewise here, he just has this kind of belief in you know, and it's often the fact that he can play so many positions, but he can also play so many styles of rugby.
Yeah.
And he can kind of adapt on the fly to what the game needs and what anything needs in that moment. Yeah. And he's so good at just spotting something in a split second and playing to that.
100%. I think that game, interestingly, is a real marker of how good both teams are.
Yeah.
You know, that Argentina you know, you thought, oh, they can't compete with this Ireland team. Maybe they're a level below that. And then actually they matched Ireland for 60-odd minutes, you know. But Ireland, on the flip side, it's an 80-minute game.
Yeah.
And they showed how good they are when they had mostly an off day. Not entirely an off day, but mostly an off day for kind of their standards, that they didn't get that thing that they're doing rolling for 60 minutes after that, you know.
Because I think...
But they still closed the game out.
There's a few interesting things, right? Because obviously Ireland this autumn, it's kind of flown under the radar, but they've brought Andrew Goodman in as their attack coach. Obviously they'd had, I was about to say Mike Lee. Yeah, the film director Mike Lee, best known for Secrets and Lies, Abigail's Party, you know, no, it was, Mike Catt obviously has left, gone to Australia, not to the national team. And yeah, we've seen in his place Andrew Goodman come up from Leinster, step up. And it feels like they're broadly playing very, very similar rugby, but it feels like they're far more built on a couple of carries, you know, than people setting plays. Like they're going to those backs slightly less often. I thought Mac Hansen was back to his absolute best this weekend. I saw a couple of people being more down on him, which I didn't understand at all, because I thought he was doing that playmaking thing he does brilliantly, and he allowed them to have a second playmaker alongside Crowley, who was brilliant for the kind of 50-odd minutes he was on. Who again, like after those first 2 minutes of being knocked in the face, kind of woke right up and was like, let's be phenomenal today.
He scored his third ever try, of course, on the weekend. He's scored more for Ireland than he has for Munster, which is
got his first try ever. It was for Ireland in the Six Nations.
In professional level, but still.
I imagine he's probably run some in at like amateur touch levels.
Sure.
But yeah, so I thought Hansen allowed them to play that wonderfully. But I think we are seeing over these two games, Ireland's system being even more built on the forwards doing things than like the backs running those shapes. It's the thing George Ford talked about when he was on Love of Rugby, right? That clip that did the rounds a few times of him wanting the backs to be involved, of like opening space up so the forwards aren't just carry. The forward carries feel much more important the way Goodman's playing, as they were at Leinster. You know, it's the subtle difference between these systems. But I also think this is the downside. We did that video on the Leinster Academy system, right? And they share, right down to like under 12 schools teams, versions of their playbook, so that everyone grows up playing the same style. So when they then get up to Leinster level, they are used to playing that style and they know it inside out and they know those players and they know how to play that game. And in Ireland, Andy Farrell very smartly has gone, okay, we'll play like that. You know, because we've got a core of players that know how to play it inside out, and we can teach the odd player, you know, incredibly adaptable, brilliant players, you know, like Crowley and like all the Connacht players and all the players, you know, that come in, can run that, and because they're good, talented players. And I think we saw an issue here, which was that these guys have been playing the same system since they were 12, right? And when they're suddenly brought into a very different game where that style isn't working for them 2 weeks in a row, they haven't really known how to adapt.
Sure.
And I think Ireland have managed that late stage of that game incredibly well, but I don't think they adapted the game they were in. Because they were a better team than Argentina and they could have pulled away there, but instead they kind of let Argentina dictate the game they were playing.
Ireland have a lot of plan A's rather than like a plan B. You know, if plan A isn't working, great, what's plan A number two, you know? And often that is a case of like, there are small tweaks to what they do, you know, like sometimes they'll play Tyburn as a middle forward, sometimes they'll play as an edge forward. He was very much edge forward for most of this game this week, for example, you know, and there are subtle differences between certain members of the backline that can play. You know, there was no Bundy Archie this week. So as you say, that they will carry a little bit more in the forwards, they'll play a little bit more off 9, you know, to try and get the front forward that way rather than going to Archie, you know. There are subtle differences to what they do, but as you say, when their backs are against the wall, how do you change that whole thing on its head, you know? And that is kind of the question. There's been a lot of talk, most of it weird talk, around the number 10 jersey.
Yes.
And I think it's important to kind of address this a little bit because for some reason, and look, we're not in Ireland, so maybe we just don't get it, right? But there's a lot of chat between Munster and Leinster fans kind of going, oh no, Crowley's the best, you don't get it. Or, oh no, Prendergast or Frawley's the best, you don't get it. And it's just kind of like, well...
Burncamp's gone quiet.
Yeah, that too. But they're all really good players, right? There are 3 outstanding 10s that, as a Welsh fan, I'm like, oh God, I wish I could have one of them. One of those guys. But Jack Crowley, right, was absolutely brilliant on the weekend.
He's their number one.
He's
their nailed
almost got the full house, didn't get the penalty. He got a try, he got a conversion, he got a drop goal, he didn't get the penalty. It's the easiest one, Jack. What are you doing? Anyway, he was fantastic. I think he managed that game really well. the period, the sort of the second 20 minutes when Ireland was sort of quietening down, he managed that really, really well.
He did. That drop goal option is superb because that's not something Ireland have typically done outside the last 5 minutes. And that is much more of a monster way of running the game, you know? And actually, it is the benefit to how Ireland are capable of playing is they can sometimes, if they have a player like Crowley, they can go, okay, you run it your way and then step in. And you raise the question of, right, does Farrell bring him off because of that? I don't think that's the case. No. You know, I think there'll be those that think like, oh, he started playing too Munster-ish, and therefore they went, oh, this isn't Leinster.
There is no great conspiracy
I don't think there
behind
is. Beyond the fact
players.
that Farrell is smart and likes cohesion, and he likes players that know each other and know the systems set out.
But it's a national team.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point in it.
And I think that was like really smart. But I also think, right, there's again been a lot of talk about Sam Prendergast, whether he deserved this chance, whether he should be in, etc. The thing is, right, Ireland, for a decade now, since O'Gara retired in 2011, so more than a decade, have been reliant on 110, who they then played every game where they're available for 80 minutes as much as possible. Yeah. And then every now and again, you know, in a game against Fiji, they'd throw a Joey Carberry or
Ian Madigan.
Yeah. Like a token bone. And then they'd expect them, you know, whenever Sexton gets injured, to suddenly be able to take over and run this system flawlessly, and that just wasn't possible, right? And it led to these World Cup performances that just weren't right. And now
that's the beauty of Crowley being in, though.
So it matters. You need to be giving players like Prendergast, who might not be the Ireland 10 right now, that in 3 years' time he could well be. You know, he's 4 years younger than Crowley.
Yeah,
you need to have a second option there that isn't Ross Byrne, and you also, everyone knows what Byrne can do. We saw somewhat Frawley can do, right? You want to build that depth. They've got to build depth. And that means giving these players goes, right?
Sure.
And it's something that, it's the one real criticism of the way Farrell has managed this Ireland team, is he hasn't managed players' minutes very well, and he hasn't built depth. And I think actually the Prendergast call was incredibly bold and a great bit of that, you know?
Yes.
And you've got to hope that him giving a young player a chance to show what they can do for half an hour, it's incredibly bold.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's inspired. Like, Jack Crowley's having a brilliant game. He's clearly not hooked him off because he was playing poorly or because he wasn't what they needed. They've backed this 21-year-old and gone, great, we're going to chuck you in the deep end, see what you're made of. Can you manage a really tight test match against one of the best teams in the world? Yeah, it's a 21-year-old fly half, right? And sure, like, I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, Prendergast absolutely bossed it. You know, he was very much not the story of that game, right? But they closed the game out. They won with a 21-year-old fly half on the pitch, right, for his first cap. That is invaluable. You know, if when you're building to World Cups and knockout games and so on, right? If you have somebody who has done that in his first 5 caps, or just done that at all, right? That is such a huge bit of experience, and that's going to build on in his second, third, fourth, fifth cap. Onto like his 30th cap, if he has managed so many of these games and closed them out and won them, right, that is more valuable to a fly half than any amount of skill that we already know Sam Prendergast has. You know, when you've seen him play at club level and the stuff that you see him do.
A game like that at international level for half an hour is worth the equivalent of like 10, 15 club matches, if not more.
100%.
You know, experience. It's almost a full season worth of club matches. You can kind of get in and experience some learnings there.
Or even games against like lower nations, tier 2 nations, you know. If he comes on as a blinder against Tonga, for example, right?
Fiji this weekend.
Somebody that you expect Ireland to beat convincingly, right? Instead, you know, you expect him to do well off that and got a great team around him, right? If you put him on against Argentina when their backs are against the walls and they come out and they win it, right? How much is that worth? And I know that one thing that I've seen people saying is the amount of hype around Sam Prendergast is going to break him, right? And that is, I think, a legitimate concern to have, you know, because there are certain players in international rugby where that has happened for. You know, I think the main player that goes in the opposite direction of that is Marcus Smith, who got quite overhyped in his first few caps, you could say. And also, like, the hype doesn't hurt anybody. Like, if a player's great at rugby, just talk about how great they are.
The other thing about Smith, though, is he got hyped, and then he got the typical English rugby thing of everything's either the best in the world or the worst in the world. You know, and everyone kind of went like,
oh, he's so overrated.
He's terrible. You should never leave a win shirt again. You shouldn't even wear that. Don't then look at quarters anymore. And instead, now, he is the form player in international rugby at the minute.
Because he learned to manage games, and he was brilliant off the back of that. And the thing is, I think that Smith is somebody who kind of thrives off that pressure a little bit. He saw it as positive pressure of like, I've just got to deliver. And from what I can tell of Prendergast so far, he seems like that kind of personality that he wants to put on a show. He likes the thought that people are looking at him, you know.
in a slightly arrogant way. Like, you're a fly half, you need to be a little bit arrogant about it. You need to, enjoy the attention a little bit. Yeah. Otherwise, you're playing in the wrong position.
It's very different to the Noel Olseo and Sam Prendergast and Sam Costellos of the world, rather, who are clearly confident kids, but the pressure gets to them.
Sure.
And I think we saw that, like, in that generation of 10s, that kind of, there was a weird, like, middle ground of 10s that came through during COVID almost, like, affected them. That's a whole other thesis. The other thing I do want to mention about... that's a whole other Tau Felice. The other thing I do want to mention about Ireland, right, is the discipline. Do you know what the penalty count was in this game?
No.
13-6 against Ireland.
Yeah,
13 penalties. Argentina gave away 6 penalties, 4 of them were for high tackles, right? Which is, hopefully, you can coach that out of players, and then you bring it down to 2, just the 2 penalties being conceded that are preventable.
That's mad.
Which is a crazy turnaround from where Argentina were at the start of the Rugby Championship, never mind last year. But it's traditionally been a bit of a, something that's really held them back. And I think that really shows how this Argentina team are maturing, the patience they're building, and the way that they did, like, it felt like a very concerted, timed effort into the game there from Argentina, and they allowed Ireland just to get more and more frustrated. And I think because this Ireland team, basically, for most of them, everything bar Champions Cup finals has gone well for them over the last few years, Quarterfinals and Champions Cup finals, they fall over, fine, pressure, whatever, that's different. But every other game's gone broadly their way. And as Argentina start to frustrate them, they start to draw more and more frustration out of them. And it really makes me wonder how well they're going to do in the Six Nations, because I think this is the most interesting they've been from that perspective in a while, because they've broadly been excellent in the exact same way for a few campaigns now. And now, teams are sort of starting to figure them out.
I do think...
And I don't know if they have peaked, or if this is just like a moment of the plateau, and then they kick on again.
Come the Six Nations, I think teams and coaches and analysts will use this game more so than the All Blacks game that they lost as kind of a blueprint of, how do we rattle Ireland?
Yeah.
Like, how do we slightly get under their skin, especially when they are still playing like Ireland, The other
point around the Six Nations, though, is that Andy Farrell won't be there. He wasn't supposed to be here at the minute, So will Simon Easterby have any licence to evolve this team and move them forward? Or will it just be, just do what I was doing, lad, go on? And
I think it's going to be the latter.
I think so. I think he's going to tell them to play exactly the same game.
Because Andy Farrell is like the most system-led coach imaginable, both sides of the ball.
I think there's going to be almost zero flexibility. Like, even less than... Farrell needs to start evolving this team, and I don't think he'll allow someone else to do that.
Yeah.
I think that won't happen until about this time next year.
Yeah, I agree.
And so this Six Nations might be the time which Ireland are most vulnerable over the Andy Farrell era.
On the flip side of that, though, if they do exactly the same thing and basically coast on having a great playbook and incredible players and a game plan that is really effective, right, and they still win, then that is a real indictment that they are going to go a long way, and that something is potentially changing about this team, and that when it does come to quarterfinals and so on, that they will be a little bit more ready in a couple more years. And it's one of those things that, obviously this is pure speculation, but... Yeah, it could send them in one or two directions.
I've always said that no team achieves anything great without proper heartbreak,
Yeah.
And that 2023 quarter-final against the All Blacks felt like that.
Yeah.
And actually this autumn might be them now realising there's more to it than just a one-off game,
Agreed, yeah.
and kicking them on a bit. And
it can make or break their momentum, the next campaign that they have. For sure.
So I'm really interested in how they go.
Yeah.
Argentina play France this weekend, which is going to be the most fun you'll ever have. Because both those teams are developing reasonably similar styles of play, I'm really enjoying the way Argentina don't really box kick. That's their
adaptation. Is it because box kicking's woke?
It's because it's woke and because they hate anything woke. Famously. They like to be asleep over games.
But I know what you mean, it's different, isn't it? Like, I like the way that they kind of bait their 10, like pimp him out a little bit, and just let people put pressure on him.
Everyone's trying to work out the best way around this new kicking law, right? And we're going to, I think, doing a video about this after the Autumn Internationals. But Argentina's response has been to not box kick at all. And it's really interesting how that's changing the way they're playing. And it's like the exiting being a lot worse. But actually their general play around the field, I think their kicking's improved.
It's great, because as soon as you play into the back line, naturally, because that's what most teams box kick nowadays, oppositions will bring their wingers into the line, and it creates a little bit more space in the backfield.
It's been really
and I like it. Kicking off 10 has kind of gone a little bit out of fashion the last couple of years. And Argentina,
other than crossfield bombs,
and Argentina are showing that actually it might be the way forward again. It might be another trend that we're back into.
So Argentina play France this weekend.
That
should be really exciting. Ireland play Fiji. We haven't seen the team at the time of recording this, but I'd expect some changes. I expect them to try and force that kind of changes through a bit more, some of that depth. I would expect them to beat Fiji, probably much more comfortably than, obviously they beat Wales, they beat Spain, but, Scotland beat them pretty comfortably. This is going to be the stronger team that Wales faced.
Yeah.
And, I think Fiji will score some fun tries, and it might be interesting to see. Josh Gardner of the Blood and Mud podcast made a really interesting point this weekend. Australia are really benefiting from playing teams the week after Fiji because it's showing how you can play them with loose structure, and how you can open them up in attack.
Yeah.
And I think actually that Australia game I'm really excited, really intrigued by, because I think if Australia beat Scotland this weekend, that becomes a hell of a contest.
Yeah. It's great looking back on a game like that because Argentina are a great team to watch because they're so dogged. And Ireland are just a great team to watch. It speaks for itself. Like the tries they score, and also like in defence, they're great to watch. And like weirdly, I enjoy watching them at set piece. Is that an okay thing to say? Like I enjoy Andrew Porter as an athlete so much, and like looking back on a game like that where it's two such different styles of rugby, and both teams are having to adapt their games a little bit on the fly.
Yeah.
Like it's such a fascinating game.
So that's what's coming up soon. We've got more stuff coming up. We'll look at Ireland, France. We'll look at the other roundup of other games. But otherwise, I believe this has been rugby. And apologies if our microphones cut out or changed at any point during this video and the audio was bad. I hope you've had a lovely rugby.